Hmm. Do you speak Michif?
It's very similar to Cree. I can read it. Kawapamtin Mina.
Oh, nice.
But that's stylistically, that just helps people to understand because speaking Cree is about short and long sounds, right? So they double up the vowels so that you know that it's a long sound. But usually, like anybody who understands the I guess official linguistic, I don't even know what you'd call it, norms is that you have a macron to indicate the long sound, but a lot of people don't know what that means,
I see.
right? So that's why they do that. It's a
That's what that
strategy.
is.
What?
That is
That means I'll see you. We'll see you later.
honestly,
What?
you just taught me something.
Why?
Yeah, because I always wondered what that was.
The little lines? It's
Yeah,
either a flat line or a little
right.
peak.
And the flat line is
One's called a circumflex, like
okay.
it's just a linguistic term, or the other is called a macron. But both of them indicate that it's a long sound.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the E always has a long sound because in the Cree language, it represents an aspiration. So when you teach the language, are we on?
Yep,
Okay.
We're on now.
When you teach the language, you teach the vowel sounds. And so the Cree language has 4 vowels, 3 long sounds, and 4 long sounds and 3 short sounds. So the eh, so you put your hand in front of your mouth. Go ahead. So you feel that? The air?
Yeah.
So that because breath is tied to like teachings about life, there's also other teachings that tied to like the importance and significance of breath. So is a long sound, and it always is like in terms of the phonetics and the sound formation. So no matter what, there's no short sound for It's just always a long sound, and it's not like ooh ah e.
Right.
Like it's not an obvious long sound, but the sound is the aspiration. Yeah. So. Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting.
Oh, I know. Cree is amazing. Like,
Yeah.
Cree's
I know. I
amazing to
can't wait
understand that.
till you teach me like we've been talking about since I met you.
You need a whiteboard.
I know. How are you anyways? How was your weekend?
My weekend was good. It's always really busy and short. Being a solo working mom who's trying to also do music, there's very little free time, but I'm also prone to being optimistic. So it could have been a challenging weekend, but I always come out of it saying, it was a great weekend because I was given another day, given another, chance to get it right. So it was a good weekend.
Why don't you just take a second to introduce yourself, but without talking about what you do.
Okay.
So who are you without what you do for work, what you do for music? Who are you without all of that?
Who am I without all of that? I suppose from an Indigenous perspective, being a Nehiao Cree Esquel or woman with Métis roots is to locate myself. That's an Indigenous or Cree way of doing. So I grew up on the Red Pheasant First Nation, and my maternal roots connect me to Cumberland House, Saskatchewan. I strongly identify with my roots because I feel it not only defines me, but it also helps me navigate through life and gives me purpose and meaning and I guess accountability in terms of the relationship that I have with those that came before me, the relationship I have with the people in my life, even my students, and the relationship that I have with those who are yet to come. So locating myself isn't just, okay, I'm a registered Indian with the Red Pheasant First Nation. I take a lot of pride in the fact that I represent my nation, who is also connected to all the other nations across Turtle Island. But that's kind of the point behind locating yourself is being in a living relationship with where you come from, who is tied to that space, who is then tied to those spaces in this life and the next, I guess, if that makes sense. So, did that answer your question? Yeah. So I strongly identify with being a woman. being Cree, but then I guess on the macro scale, just being another human being trying to get it right.
Hmm. That's actually a very good answer. That was really really good. Um, when it comes to like your culture and where you're from um and your teacher,
Mhm.
so how do you bring that into your teaching?
It took a while to, how would you say, develop a sense of love for who I was. I was raised from infancy on my First Nation with first language Cree speakers. Both my mom and dad were first language Cree speakers, something that we'll get to a point in this life where none of us will be first language speakers, and there won't be any, just because of colonization and the impacts of residential schools and the fact that we are in this homogenized Western space where it's hard to find isolated communities where only Cree is spoken, for example. So eventually, we'll become the generations that'll be second language Cree speakers. But I was
Mm,
lucky to grow up on my First Nation among people who spoke the language, so immersed in the language, and the language informed my identity. And also being blessed to have been raised by people who carried like Nehio B'Matiswin, or the Cree way of life that hadn't really been impacted by colonization in terms of the transmission of knowledge. So my dad's parents and my dad and his family still carried on like the Cree ways of prayer, the spirituality, the ways of doing and seeing the world. So even though my nukumpan, or my kukam who passed away, my dad's mom went to residential school, she didn't abandon her Cree way of living or spirituality. She instead drew parallels between Catholicism and Christianity
mm,
and her ways of prayer, and found a way to connect, right? Connect the two. And as a result, we became like hybrid. How would you say? Like, we could go into a church and pray and not look down at where we came from. And we can go into ceremony and pray and not look down at Christianity, because we were taught to have a
right.
reverence and a respect for both. And so, even that in itself, I was really lucky to have grown up in that environment where prayer was important no matter what. But then, coming into like we're talking like the early 90s, being a child, finally having to leave the reserve, or leaving my First Nation more often to go into town, North Battleford, and experiencing racism, at
Mm,
that time. And as I began to immerse in the non First Nation world, or the Munya world, or the Western world, becoming fully aware of what I represented as a little First Nation girl, I began to understand my positionality in relation to that world. And I suppose over time, going into high school in North Battleford, and then doing music within the community, playing softball. And it didn't matter how I presented myself or how much I practiced or what I did to fit in, I never fit in, right? There was just no space held in terms of like, I'm interested in you. On the flip side, as an artist, someone always made space for me in the non Indigenous community, which has
mm,
allowed me to become the artist that I am today. Right? So there was always someone who created space, but at the same time, I was still an other. I was still a them, that, there. So probably at the age of 12, I wanted so badly to be appreciated and valued in that world and to be successful that I started to abandon myself, and probably somewhere developed a unconscious resentment for who I was. And so I wanted to be, I wanted to be white. So I had to
mm,
change myself, my pronunciation, my enunciation, like losing my talk essentially, and then distancing myself from my family and distancing myself from, I guess, my community to try to be successful over here. And so when you ask me, like, how does that play into who I am now? Well, there was a healing journey that had to take place before I could be in this position where I guess, I have a love for who I am. I have an appreciation for who I am. And now I advocate in a space where I work with inner city Indigenous youth trying to give them opportunity and modeling behaviors and modeling, how to say that self-love and that self-respect, so that they too can internalize it and develop a healthy sense of self, where I didn't have that opportunity in high school. So I guess I had my own journey of like losing myself. And the only way I came back full circle is in 2016. I went back to university to the Department of Curriculum Studies. They were having an Indigenous Languages certificate program. So it was going back to language that brought me back to this place of, I guess, reconnection to myself and kind of stabilizing who I was holistically. So it was back to language, back to ceremony, back to who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my strength came in as a person. And that led me to the capacity that I work today. So,
Do you think like it's like working in the inner city, like I'm sure there's a lot of youth that maybe feel lost,
mm-hmm,
probably don't go home much, are in the city,
mm-hmm.
don't go back. Like, do you feel like you're able to kind of like bring that, or like maybe help them come to maybe like some kind of terms of who they are,
Mm-hmm.
or help them identify
Mm-hmm.
so they feel like they can find themselves again?
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I feel like that would be hard.
Working with like the Indigenous youth here in the city, the inner city, many of our students, and I don't want to generalize, but many of our students are urbanized, or they've never even had the opportunity to go back to their respective First Nations. They've only been in
Mm,
an urban setting. And so a lot of them come into our program with a poor appreciation for who they are and where they come from, and almost, I don't want to say shame, but there is that underlying shame because of the Indigenous experience. The Indigenous experience within mainstream society will always be challenged because the world that we live in doesn't embrace or celebrate. We're getting to that space. Like I always tell my students, when I went to high school, there was no orange shirt day. There
right.
was no ribbon shirt day. There was no boys with braids. Those sort of campaigns or movements didn't exist. And so the Indigenous voice has grown as a result of having strong allies, right? Because we need allies to create that change, to live in relationship with one another. So because this space has been created in response to the calls to action, in response to truth and reconciliation, and in response to people who are just good people, the world is very different than it was when I went to high school. And they're all like, "Oh, how old are you?" And I tell them my age. They're like, "Oh my gosh." I mean, don't you even call me old. They're like, "You look so young." I'm like, "Well, I drink water and I don't smoke." And anyway,
You
and
are
I'm
young.
Cree.
You are young.
And then they laugh. But um, so the world is different. So I don't want to generalize and say everyone's coming into our program feeling ashamed. I want to instead say that most often we feel ashamed because the space in which we live in is pretty rigid, and there's not a lot of people who are curious and interested, like, "Oh, you're First Nation? Oh, that's fascinating. That's a beautiful thing," right? For the most part, our province and maybe spaces within our province and our country don't really celebrate, our indigeneity in a way that would
Mm.
help us to have a healthy sense of self, right? That healthy sense of self is built in the home, but is still challenged in the outside world, just because. So they don't all come in feeling ashamed, but they do come in, how would you say it, like fragmented understandings of themselves, or displaced, from those roots. And I'm doing my graduate studies in Indigenous languages through the University of Regina, or the First Nations University of Canada. And so we've talked a lot about this homogenous pressure that all ethnicities experience being in a predominant Western space, and even like in a globalized sense, that Western pressure of pop culture and even the English language is so pervasive in all ethnicities. But if we bring it back home, it definitely impacts us as Indigenous people, because where do we see ourselves? where do we see our language? How often, for example, here in your store, you have, what's called standard Roman orthography. We're using the English lettering system to write the Cree language.
Mm.
How often do we visibly see ourselves in a conscious unconscious state, and how does that inform who we are, right? So they come in with a lacking sense of self because the world around them doesn't promote or encourage the
Right.
identity markers that should be there, right? So we identify as Canadians, which
Mm.
is sort of dictated by the dominant world. So they come in lacking for a variety of factors. And so what our program does, and what I've been a part of, is try to create a space where they can take little puzzle pieces and start to build, a connection to their indigeneity. And so going back to my graduate studies, quite often in literature, when we write about revitalization, there's a hyphen in the remembering, re-hyphen vitalization, re-hyphen connection. And the hyphen is a calibration to remind us that we have to create space. There has to be space and there has to be a pause. Because if I re-space or re-hyphen connect, there's no timestamp on that. Like, how long is it going to take me to reconnect to who I am as an Indigenous person because of what happened in the history of colonization, all the factors that are impacting my healthy sense of self? So the Indigenous experience isn't going to run parallel with other nations, other than maybe like the Maori or other Indigenous nations around the world. But anybody who was colonized, there's a space that has to be created because there's no timestamp, or there's no measurement, or there's no recipe to say, okay, if you do A, B, C, and D, and you follow it in these steps, you're going to be a healthy, functioning Cree
Mhm.
person, right? So there's a space that has to be created because it's so individualistic, because all of our paths to getting to where we were are have been impacted by so many diverse factors. So in my literature, we learn about how the Indigenous experience is inherently different than everyone else's experience. It's not that we have to change things because, they deserve to have, this and that. It's not that. It's we need that space, right? Because our stories have been, like, the impact of colonization is so prevalent. It's every day. It's not like, that happened in the past. No, that past is in the present, right? I have to heal if I can heal. And they say it takes 7 generations to heal from, like the intergenerational trauma, the lateral violence, all of that. So what generation am I and how long is it going to take, right? So it's definitely individualistic. So that space that has to be created is really important. I think our program, again, going back to the puzzle pieces, we really are just giving these little tiny pieces. But year after year, what we see is this strengthening and this changing of trajectories in our students that probably wouldn't have been there if we didn't have this space where we say, okay, we're going to take you, we're going to teach you about how to smudge. We're going to teach you about, wagutwin, how to live in relationships, sagutwin, how to love one another. We have a cookum here, and just having a cookum present, she's going to tell you teachings. Story work is it's an Indigenous methodology, right? It's an Indigenous method to teaching. And that connects to like blood memory. So even in these spaces, I might say something like "Mamutao na kisemantu," "Naskumwan." I can say "Creator of the heavens, thank you, I am grateful." And maybe they don't understand the language, but like what my dad said and what the elders say and what our teachings tell us is that blood memory, something happens when they hear the language, because it's an identity marker that connects on the external, but it also connects within the like physiology, like the holistic response of a person and the memories that are tied within our, I guess it's epigenetics, but our blood memory. So even that, providing a space for language. And I guess you asked me, like, how does who I am impact? The fact that maybe I carry that language and I speak the language and I create a space where it's okay to be First Nation. It's okay to say, you know what, I tried to be white. And they all laugh. Because I had a student, and I'll never forget, I won't say his name, but he's like, if you grew up on the reserve, why do you sound white? And I'm like, thank you for saying that, because I changed how I speak so I could fit in, like having those genuine moments where it's okay to just be who you are and to
Hmm.
celebrate where they come from and, you know, create that relationship, I guess, is part of like what I do in my program. And I guess that in itself is a methodology, or what do they call it? Part of like the paradigm is that's what Wagutun is, looking at my students and saying, you're my kin. So I often say, like, I would love to go back home, like back to living and working close to home with my family. And sometimes, as people get older, we've had losses. I get lonely for home, but then I realize I work here in the city with Indigenous youth, and they are my kin, right? They are me, and I am them, and they're my family here. So I think about that too, because if I left, I'd be leaving my family to go back to my family. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so even that modeling, what does Wagutun look like? It looks like the fact that you're like my son, you're like my daughter, you're like my niece, my nephew, and demonstrating what that looks like. That reciprocity is, I guess, a way of also allowing them to say, okay, this is what it's like when you go to Indian country, or this is what it's like. This is what they talk about kinship. Oh, this is what, right? So they understand how even that in itself, being Indigenous, being First Nation, being Cree, living in relationship with one another, what does that look like? So I guess like on a grand scheme, like it's a lot. Working in Indigenous education is a lot, but it's also a privilege. And I don't think I would be able to do it if I didn't grow up on my reserve with my language, with my culture, my traditions. I don't know if I'd be able to do it the way I can. You know what I mean? Could I have opened a textbook and learned how to do that? I don't know. But anyway.
Even even like your mindset around it is amazing, because it's really, like when you talk about trying to be white, you know, there's probably a lot of people who would never talk about that, you know, like
It was almost a survival response.
yeah, and that's the thing is like it's awesome. It's like really amazing that you can recognize that like your journey was something,
Mm-hmm.
and you needed to go through these things and these
Mm-hmm.
changes and realizations, and
Mm-hmm.
you know some of them super extreme, some of
Mm-hmm.
them not extreme,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not good or bad, it just is,
Mm-hmm.
and it brought you to where you are today.
Mm-hmm.
And that because you can recognize that, you can help these kids recognize that like, yeah, I did that, I was there,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fine. It's not, whereas you don't talk about it with shame,
Mm-hmm.
you know and that's awesome. That's like really, really powerful, I think.
Well, there was a time I did feel a lot of shame. Like I tried. So there's a book I think by Richard Wagamese. I think it's Richard Wagamese. It's called Keeper in Me. And in the story, the character tries to be all these things because I think they were a little bit mixed ethnicity. So in the book, he tries to be Hawaiian, and he tries to be Korean, and he tries to be anything but himself. But in the story, he goes back, right, to who he was, similar to myself. And so there was a time when I would have been ashamed of myself, but I was so lost. Sure, I had a degree and I had this and I had that, but spiritually I was so lost because I was so disengaged from my true self or my authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
And so that too is important, that I tell these stories to my students. So that too becomes like, oh, right. Because it's so hard. Sometimes it's so hard to be First Nation in a world that doesn't celebrate you. Like you go to Hawaii, for example, and I'm sure they have their own colonization story. Like they're kind of leading the pack in terms of even their language schools. But you get off the plane and people celebrate, like, aloha, and
Mm,
people get on
yeah.
to like celebrating the culture. Well, you go here, for example, they have the FSI in Powell, or they just had the Chief Thunderstick National Invitational Hockey. How many non-Indigenous people are in those spaces trying to say, okay, I really want to get to know this. I want to understand it. I think that disengagement is still, or that fear, or that apprehension is still there because our country is still in a space of, trying to create those healthy forms of connection. And so it'd be lovely to get to a point where it's like, what, your Cree? That's amazing. Do you know the Cree language? Blah, 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 blah. And people have a reference point.
Mm.
But I guess that shift is happening. I think I started talking about that with my students, is that when I was in high school, there wasn't all these initiatives, or there wasn't as much education that is happening. So there is a shift. There is a shift that's happening, and space is being created. And there's never been a more exciting time to be Indigenous than now, because of the amplified voice that exists where it didn't exist anymore. So even though it's still difficult, there has been growth over
Mm.
time. So I guess that's the optimism too, is to realize, like, not to have that deficit based thinking. Like, it is hard to be First Nation, it's hard to be Indigenous in our country, but it's come a long way in even just 20 years.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask about, because I noticed, when you talk about how you found a balance between your spirituality
Mm-hmm.
and with with religion,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like coming together and being in a balance with both.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I know something I've noticed when I go out to communities and help out, and there is quite a divide between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it seems like there is a lot of um, like you're either spiritual or you're religious, and
Mm-hmm.
they do look down on one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, like, coming from somebody who's found a balance,
Mm-hmm.
how did you find that balance? How did you become, like, just okay with both?
Mm-hmm.
Or how does that work for you?
I think it comes from being nurtured in an environment where that reverence to prayer was instilled within us. Um, and sure, I've been at the crossroads in my lifetime, especially once you start to, like, study world religions and world history. You have those big, how would you call it, existential questions about
Mm.
life and meaning, and living in the here and now, and materialism and all of that. But I suppose, I suppose for me, it just works. And part of it is, again, is that nurturing process, and the fact that I can hear the voice of, the old people that were part of my life, that encourage respect, Manachi twin, Kistay twin, Dapwe, and, like, living in truth and respect and having positive regard, that there's only one creator, there's only one God, right? That's what we were always taught. And if I say the Our Father, or if I say a prayer in Cree, it's the essence of prayer and keeping that strong spirit and that realization that this life is only temporary, right? And that eventually, we go to that next place. And what's the whole point in living in life is to be a good person, to walk in a good way, to live in good relationship, to have love and care, to take care of the earth, to essentially leave the world a better place, because no matter what, no matter when you go, someone's coming behind you. What kind of space are you leaving for those people? So I guess, like, what is that? That's a fundamental truth. Then when you start to realize those fundamental truths and start to say, okay, how are we more alike? Instead of saying, how are we different? How are we more alike? And again, I had the privilege of teaching a Catholic studies class where we studied world religions. So I had to study world religions so I could teach world religions. And then we ended up doing an activity where we drew parallels between, those key five: Hinduism, Judaism, Muslim, Christianity, and what's the fifth? Buddhism.
Mm.
And then bringing in my understanding of Cree spirituality, or Nehiao Gagi Simun, prayer or neopamat this one or ways of being, and then connecting the dots and saying, oh, look at this, there are more ways that we are similar than we are different. And instead of creating this, we're right, you're wrong, saying, oh, I get it. So that in itself, if you think about world religions and the time in which they've existed and the documentation, and then you think about what I understand about my Cree ways of doing, there's truth there, right? There's a truth. There's a fundamental truth. And what is it? And I suppose I'd consider myself an omni-believer. And for me, that just sits right. I feel strong in my convictions. And I guess that, and that's how that defines my spirituality. So I guess that comes
You're,
back to relationship.
that's like, you're awesome.
I'm like, am I even making sense?
100%.
Okay.
Everything you just said, I relate with so much.
Okay.
I'm just like,
Whew.
that's such a positive way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look for the what we have in common
Mm-hmm.
instead of the differences.
Mm-hmm.
If everyone could just do that with everything,
Right? Like, how are we similar?
yeah,
And what
that's
differences are
amazing.
there? To be curious about the differences.
Mm-hmm.
If we were more curious and less hateful,
Yeah,
and more just like, you be you,
right.
but I still want to get to know you. But,
Mm-hmm.
because life is so short, and why should we live in a space where I think that should be a barometer. If you're looking at someone and there's hate or negativity,
Mm-hmm.
that should be your calibration to say, oh, wait a second, right? There's something wrong here. I can't look at hate upon, right, that person. Like, I don't know them, right? But again, that comes along with society. What does our society do to inform us? Yeah, education is important too. What are our schools doing, right? What are we doing to create this space of separatism rather than togetherness? Yeah.
So no wonder you're always smiling. This is how your mind functions. That is amazing. That was.
And like, I think about, like, people would think, oh, you went to university. Sure, I went to university. But really, I think what university did was affirm what I already knew. And what I already knew was nurtured by my grandparents, my great grandparents, and the people who've never stepped foot in a university, but carried these fundamental laws that were informed by their spaces of origin, like we call them traditional laws, right? Laws of the creator that govern their actions and the way they saw the world. And so what university did was just affirm what these people who would have been deemed as illiterate or not uneducated by Western standards were actually, philosophers, and, they were botanists, and they were psychologists, all those well-regarded positions were found right at home because of their nurturing and their upbringing according to their Cree experience. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So I suppose when I share this isn't my knowledge. I didn't come up with it on my own. It was nurtured. It doesn't belong to me, right? Somehow it exists. Sometimes when I'm teaching, and again, this goes back to epigenetics or blood memory. Sometimes I'm teaching and I'll tell a story. I'm like, where did that come from? I didn't read it anywhere, but it lives within my blood memory, right? So sometimes in those spaces, and I'm giving teachings to my students, I'm like, where did that come from? I didn't read it anywhere, but it's living knowledge that's living within me and then being transferred, right?
It's like an interesting concept, blood memory.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I feel like that sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes I feel like maybe, not that I'm special or anything,
Of course you are.
but like sometimes I feel like I'm speaking to somebody, and like maybe I've just lived more lives or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we just can't relate, or we can't connect, or like it's like our spirits can't connect or something, and it's like maybe we're just like out of sync. I'm like, well, like why? Like why can't I figure this person out? And it's like maybe it comes down to something like that. I don't know, but I've never heard that term before. Blood memory.
Yeah, it's I suppose I I can't really think of like times when that exact word usage would have been used, but I heard it at a gathering, a treaty medal ceremony. There was an elder speaking, and he used that term, blood memory. Then I started to see it in my literature,
Mm.
and then I studied psychology because I thought I was going into the counseling profession. And so I really gravitated towards psychology classes and understanding why humans do the way things that they do. And then that's kind of where I first heard the term or came across the term epigenetics. And I did a little bit of research on that. So it's an actual school of study, right? It's a science, right? We tend to be very fact-based as a society, right? What we can
Yeah.
see and what we can prove based on theories, scientific theory. So it's an actual scientific theory. And so, yeah, it's interesting, right? It's almost we want to grasp something tangible because we live in the here and the now
Mm-hmm.
and what we can see and touch. But I guess from an Indigenous perspective or a Cree way of doing, again, this whole notion doesn't just belong to us here in Turtle Island. There's other Indigenous nations across the world who have similar ways of thinking. But, we exist we exist in this space, but we're connected to who came before us. And like I remember when I first started teaching the language, I was so frustrated. I was so frustrated. I remember crying in the kitchen of my mom's home, and I was talking to my dad, and I said, I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'm not going to know enough that I should have known because I lost all that time of study that I could have been spending with like my kukums and my mushrooms and in that space of retaining that knowledge because I, went this way. And then what if I don't learn the language or, blah, 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 blah. I was struggling to speak the language because there was a lot of like shame and, a lot of disconnect. And so I couldn't pronounce it. I couldn't get my Cree tongue. And he said, you can't get frustrated. The language lives within you. It's there. So you just have to like accept that and allow it to just manifest or materialize. And he said, even with your students, just speak the language, even if they've never heard it. Something within their being will recognize it, and there'll be a reaction, whether they're aware of it or not. And so
Mm.
that again is tied to like blood memory and the living memory that exists within us. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert, but these are just my convictions.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. So how do you tie this all into and now that we've dove into your mind and your you know your culture, everything like that, how do you tie this into your music?
My music,
When did you start?
singing in Cree on a contemporary platform, or
Sure.
sure.
What's a contemporary platform?
Okay, so I've always sung. Like my family was musical. My dad played in a band. My cookum was a singer. Um, Now, was it like, let's get around the campfire and play the guitar and sing songs? No, but music was always there. And funny enough, because we went to church, there was a church on my First Nation, and we would go to church on Sundays. And there was a ministry team that worked with the surrounding First Nations in Battleford. First Nations ministry team, and they actually learned the Cree language. So there was two sisters and a priest, so two nuns and a priest
Mm.
who learned Cree and spent time building relationship on the reserves, and they'd go to functions and they were taken in as brothers and sisters because that's what it's like, in Cree countries. What people don't understand is the Cree people are such a beautiful people. They'll take you in and you'll become an aunt, an uncle, a cookum, a mushum. In that space, you'll really be taken into the family. And so they'd spend time, and there was never I'm going to bring in Catholicism and I'm going to, how would you say it? Like force you, or you have to pray this way. There was okay, this is the way we pray. We're going to bring the prayer into your community, but we're also going to learn how you pray. and we're going to create a space for you to bring your prayer into our space, and we'll come together, right, in relationship. And so I guess they would be a representation of that, of what we now understand as what's it called? Like truth and reconciliation and active reconciliation. And so, again, when you think about who I am as a person now, it's all those experiences. Like we become who we are in present day because of so many people who shared in our life. And so, this ministry team came in, and they were the first to bring in what's called SRO, or Cree written, using the English lettering system. Because my parents just spoke the language, they didn't read or write in Cree. My mom took some Cree classes because she went to college when I was a little girl. So I remember, even as a little child, seeing these turquoise colored with black writing books and opening them and not being able to read Cree. Because if you look at a Cree word written in English, well, the rules of the lettering system change, right? The K is in a hard K sound. It's a cross between a K and a G, and the T is a cross between a T and a D. And then the little macrons create long sounds. And then the formation, or the cadence and the rhythm of the language changes. So you don't read it like you would read a Cree word, an English word, right? Like Giskinamatugamek. If you saw that, it's like 18 letters long,
Mm.
right? What does that mean? It means school. So if you said, Falynn, how do you say school? Giskinamatugamek. Oh, it means school? Well, no, it actually means the place that you go to learn, because it's a descriptive language too, right? So as a child, they brought in this ministry team, brought in hymns written in Cree. And that's how I learned to read the language, because I listened, sang Amazing Grace in Cree, and learned to read it, learned to sound it out. And so that would have been my early exposure to SRO, right? But I didn't actually learn the rules of the language until I went back to school in 2016. But that's where I started to sing in Cree. Amazing Grace and Cree became something, somebody, like you think about when I was 8, 9, 10, there was no internet, right? So somebody would have said, oh, there's this little girl from Red Pheasant who sings in Cree, contemporary music in Cree. And then people would phone the school, like, oh, is there a little girl that sings there? Right? There was no Googling,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so then I started to gain a little bit of notoriety, and then I'd be offered to sing places. And at the same time, my mom put me in singing lessons. So I learned, like voice control and intonation and how to read music and that sort of education. And fast track, the, what do you call it? The Olympic torch was coming through North Battleford in the 2000s. I forget what year that was. And somehow the national anthem would have been translated by somebody, I don't know who, but I got the lyrics from, her name is Brenda Albert, gave me the lyrics, I think, at that time. And somebody invited me to sing the anthem in Cree, and an overwhelming response, very similar to when I was a little girl and people would invite me to conferences or gatherings, grand openings, and they wanted to hear the language sang in a contemporary form. Well, it was How Great Thou Art or Amazing Grace. And it wasn't because it was Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. It's a beautiful melody, but there was always this overwhelming response that people would have to this little girl singing in the language. So it was the language, the power of the language, that provoked this strong response, and people would get very emotional. And you think about the healing journeys that people have gone through, the fact that they tried to get rid of the language and the indigenous experience and the oppression and everything that our people went through. Something emotional would always happen. So contemporary song and language is kind of what's a part of me. And then I learned O Holy Night in Cree. So in my mid 20s, I started to work with an artist. He's now since passed. His name is Keith Bartlett. He also had a relationship with the Indigenous community, or the First Nation community around North Battleford. He was a Baha'i faith, and he would go to, for example, Mosquito First Nation, spend time there and learn about the people and the culture. And he invited me to his space, and he was a very well-renowned, respected, traveled the world as a musician. And we did a concert, and he recorded me singing "O Holy Night" in Cree. So the internet, was a thing. YouTube was a thing. And we put it on YouTube and it just spread like wildfire. Again, an overwhelming response. So here I was in my mid-20s. He recorded me with his equipment and we laid it down. I burned CDs. I made my own little labels. I packaged them and I would mail them all over the place. And people wanted this. There was this huge demand. And, to think about it now, I never commoditized the language. It wasn't mine. So I think I sold them for like $10.
Mm.
There wasn't like, oh, there's the supply and demand. I can make money off of this. It was always, this isn't mine. This belongs to the people. So really, I just cover the cost of the mailing and the manufacturing with a little bit of maybe a couple dollars, right? And I'd mail them out. And I think if you look it up on YouTube, that original video is well over tens of thousands of views. I haven't looked at it lately. So that when I went back to my study of Indigenous languages to become a teacher, again, in the back of my mind, I'm like, language, song. Like I was an established singer. People would invite me to spaces and to sing as a soloist. I was like, okay, I have to do something with this. And so I recorded my first album, a Cree Christmas, with all of the songs translated in Cree. Some of them I worked with a translator. His name is Dr. Solomon Rat, out of the University of Regina. I think he's still there. He's a linguist. He translated a couple, but the rest had already been translated. Where were they translated? In hymn books by somebody who had built relationship with the Indigenous community and recorded or translated the songs with somebody at some point in that history of I don't even know when, right? And they were pressed into these old leather-bound books that I have a couple that I keep at home. Some of them we did some editing, but so they had already been translated, and I recorded them, and that went off, right? I went out and I marketed and I put it online, and I couldn't even tell you the number of actual CDs I've sold, but the streaming, and again, never commoditizing, like always making sure that it was readily accessible to all people, not being able to say, okay, I have this niche market and I can make money off of it, but making sure it was attainable to all people. And CBC caught on, and I did interviews, and that led me to doing a second Cree album, which was a deluxe version where there was English and Cree, and then a new song, The Little Drummer Boy. That was actually translated by Dolores Sand, who's a Cree artist, and I think she's a teacher too here in Saskatchewan. And then that led to my first contemporary solo album where I wrote songs in Cree and then had English songs. And it was sort of like the album's called Nige, or Home, and it represents my journey. So there's a respect to my early days as an artist. So there's How Great Thou Art, Amazing Grace, and then my own contemporary music one written about the matriarchs and the women in our life, and the other about like not forgetting who we are, our identity, and then the English songs themselves are just a narrative of my life and what's important to me. So I guess that answers your question about identity, language, culture, and music, is how it came to be. Is that I couldn't leave it behind because it always served me, right? I view myself as someone who's lucky and fortunate and blessed to know my language. And so it is my responsibility on behalf of the people who hung on to the language, like my Kookums and my Mushums. Think about the atrocities and everything that happened in that colonization process and how so many abandoned their language. I was fortunate that they hung on to it. So I have to hang on to it, and I have to do so in the best way I can. Well, Creator gave me the ability to sing, so the two have to come together, right? And I guess I can't leave it behind, because I guess that's my responsibility too.
Are you still writing music today?
I haven't. I've gone through a little bit of a life always presents itself as challenges. And so in 2020, was it 2020? I released the solo album. And that same year, I won 2 awards. So the Saskatchewan Music Award and the inaugural Saskatchewan Indigenous Music Award. After that, life brought challenges, and right,
Mm.
and so I've had to overcome those first, and restabilize in like after that disruption. So music has always kind of, if my whole sick self is at an imbalance, or I'm not in a like a balanced space mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, then it's always music that falls quiet. And then
Mm.
I'm also just a solo mom.
Yeah.
To write music takes time, right? And as a solo working mom, there's not a lot of free time to be creative, but I'm trying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with musicians now and trying to do a lot more live performances, trying to establish myself that way so that maybe, I can do a tour, or I can, right? But we'll see what happens. I'm manifesting it though. Yeah.
So when you just mentioned the four aspects of the medicine wheel.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you find balance in that in your own personal medicine wheel?
I think it comes down to like truth, living truthful to myself, knowing that, and this is a teaching I guess I use with my students. It's really just a Cree word, but I think it's a Cree word that has a teaching in it. So I don't know if you've ever heard the term Wanska.
Mm-mm.
Wanska is wake up. Yeah, there's a YouTube video. Again, this isn't something that belongs to me. But Wanska could be like get up in the morning. Wanska could also be more metaphorical of like be awake, like live with purpose, keep your eyes open,
Mm.
your ears open, and believing that you always have the inherent capacity to be your best self. And no matter what, God gives you a choice, Creator gives you a choice, Creator gives you a life. And so I guess that informs and holds me accountable. And especially now having my daughter, I I never understood it before. And having my daughter, and I wrote a song on my album called "My Love, My Life." And in the song it says, "You came from the stars to walk by my side. To you I give my love, my life." Well, now I'm really held accountable to be my
Mm-hmm.
best version, so that the path that she follows, and I always heard this growing up from my Wishim, my Cookums, my grandparents, my mom, my dad. The path you follow, the path you walk is the path that your kids will follow, right? So I want to live my best life so that she can live her best life.
I
And so
think I think like one thing I really really enjoy about you is how much you talk about your daughter, because almost everything we chat about in a roundabout way gets connected to your daughter. You live through your daughter. Your values are all connected to the past, present, and future of your daughter,
Mhm.
and it always comes back to that. And I really love that about you.
Mm.
I love that you're a mother.
Well, again, I can't even take credit for that because those are the teachings I was given, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that my daughter's a gift and I have to take care of that. And at the same time, she holds me accountable to make sure I'm balanced, right? And yeah. And I guess that's the work my students as well. Like think of my students, it's such a privilege to be their teacher or to be in their life because they hold me accountable, right? I can't go into the classroom or into their space and say, okay, you have to do A, B, C, and D, right?
Mm.
And then not live that, not be authentic. And so I have to be living proof so that they too, right? Right? So yeah.
So how do you stay like maybe strong mentally, or even like, I don't know if that's the right word, but when you're in kind of a world or society or economy that it doesn't see the same maybe value in maybe indigenous stories or indigenous culture.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find like mental strength in that, or how do you um navigate that, I guess?
I often wonder where I would be if I wasn't part of my program, working where I work.
Right.
And I suppose the totality of my experience as a teacher, it has always been like my students as a whole, like being a teacher is a privilege. It doesn't matter what ethnicity or
Mm-hmm.
demographic you're teaching. My students have always been my greatest inspiration. But more so, again, that comes back to that relationship piece of seeing my Indigenous students as my kin. They've been the motivating factor too, that I want to know who I am on their behalf. I guess I just said that, but they, I guess they inspire me. They have inspired me. I don't think they'll ever, when I think about what they've done to contribute to my life, I don't think they'll ever get it in terms of how they've helped me to become the person that I am or the drive to be the person that I am. So how do I balance myself? Is that was well, that was the question. How do
Like,
I navigate my
yeah, I guess like where do you find strength in your culture
mhm.
in a place where your culture is maybe misunderstood or not valued?
Again, I think it's where I work. We have a very unique program running out of Edifine High School. Um, it's called the Mio Pamachuan program.
Mm,
So I think the fact that space has been created within that non-Indigenous setting has allowed this healthy evolution to exist. And I think if we run parallels to all sectors within Canadian society or North American society, if you create that space and give that support and work in relationship, then I think that's the recipe for creating this healthy sense of,
mm,
I guess, existence and healing that needs to happen for the Indigenous people. That's just a thought I have because I don't know if I would be able to be this person talking in front of you if I didn't have the space in which to actualize or self actualize. You know what I mean? Like I could do it in my home, I could do it in my community, but it sure makes a huge difference that I can work in that capacity within a mainstream space. You know what I mean? In a Western school to have this Indigenous program that nurtures me, allows me to connect to who I am, but allows me to teach and work with youth who are also doing the same. You know what I mean?
mm.
So I think space is important.
I wonder if your students know how freaking cool you are.
I don't know. I think I got an award recently, and this is for all the students at FINA. There's a beautiful body of students at EDFIN, very diverse ethnic group of students. But I got an award from the SLC or the Student Leadership Council for the person who laughs at her own jokes.
Heck yeah.
So I don't know if they think I'm
Heck
cool
yeah.
or just feel sorry for me. They're like, she's always nice, but she's kind of weird.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
That's a solid award.
And I wasn't even in the gymnasium to receive it. I was busy handling something else, but it's hanging on
Probably
my...
telling yourself jokes.
Probably laughing at my own jokes.
Missed it. Missed the award. Well, we're coming up to an hour. We usually like to call it at about an hour,
Okay.
but that was awesome.
Yeah.
I've
Hopefully I made sense.
okay. I got one last question for you. What's a song that lifts your spirit?
What's a song that lifts my spirit? That's a tough question. What's a song that lifts my spirit? I'm the kind of person who doesn't really have favorites. You know, I'm moved by a lot of things, but I guess it would come back to my daughter. There's an artist called Fawn Wood. I'm sure you know who she is.
Fawn Wood.
She's a traditional contemporary artist, so she sings round dance, contemporary song. But she wrote a song, I think it's called, it was a lullaby for her son. I can't quite remember the title, but I love that song and I sing it to my daughter about how, you know, I guess my role as a mother, I think that's inspiring. But what motivates me as a person? There's a lot. I don't have
Mm.
like one thing. Like I'll often listen to YouTube motivational videos to get me going in the morning.
David Goggins.
Oh, well, whatever is there for that 10-minute motivational, right? But I don't really have like a song that I play that gets me going.
Well, I can recommend one to you.
Sure.
Party in the USA by Miley Cyrus. That is my go-to.
Is it? Dude, we gotta talk.
You know, it's actually
I love Miley
the
Cyrus.
first song I walked out to in my very first boxing match.
Was part in the USA. Really?
Yeah.
I like Miley Cyrus.
I wasn't even in the
She's
USA.
pretty cool. So you like dubbed over Canada?
No, gotta keep it original. But
I don't have I actually don't have a song that. Too many.
Okay, well, thanks for coming.
Yes.
That was awesome. I learned a lot.
We'll have to talk about the language next time. But
Yeah.
And Anaskumitin, I'm very, very thankful. Anaskumitin, I thank you. And yeah, it was really nice to.
Inaskamun.
Anaskumin is I'm thankful. Anaskumitin is I thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is for our first class.
So we can say muestas. It was like, that's it for
Muestas.
now, because there's no goodbye in Korean. It's just like, that's it for now.
It's funny because when I first started doing programming and helping Newa Wellness and I with the meal movement too, that's one of the very first things I learned. I would say bye, and everyone would just stop me in my tracks.
See you later.
Yeah. Hey, don't say that.
There's no goodbyes.
See you later. There's no goodbyes.
Yeah.
Which is like, I like that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Living connection, right?
Yeah.
Living connection. Okay.
Okay. Let's call it at that.
Okay.